Now that you've gone through the operator guide, let's focus on the trainer aspect. The key takeaway from this next part of the course is that the OSHA guideline is fairly open-ended as to how you conduct the classroom instruction and the hands-on section of your operator's training. Be creative. Be realistic. OSHA states that training should be site and equipment specific, so training should reflect what your operators experience out in the real world. What we've done here in the trainer guide is given you a roadmap or guide, if you will. And as a guide, feel free to modify it as the OSHA regulations change or your operating environment or your equipment changes. First, let's touch on the basics of giving a classroom presentation. When preparing for a class, never let the students see you set up. Have the room ready to go before they get there. Have your computer and audio-video presentation equipment tested and working. It sounds pretty basic, but check things like the lights if they can be dimmed or adjusted. Check the room's comfort level, the heat and the AC. Don't attempt to teach this in a break room or on the production floor or in a warehouse. The room needs to be quiet, comfortable, and free from coworkers walking in. There's nothing more frustrating to an instructor than being interrupted by constant distractions. Just as I did when we went through the operator disc, have some notes ready. At the end of each module, you need to have some talking points to go over what we just covered. It's a best practice to keep the group small. Usually about 7 to 10 people is best. Before the trainees get there, make sure all their training material is ready, such as a notepad, pens, and the like. When the students arrive, go over the day's agenda and expectations, and above all, have the students turn off or mute their cell phones. Emphasize that breaks will be offered to check voicemail and email. After years of teaching and thousands of operators trained, trust me, these best practices will make your class go much smoother. Learn from my mistakes. It's basic human nature that sight and sound constants tend to put people to sleep. That's why after each module, I turn the lights up and use different volume levels when I speak. Turn the lights back down again when going on to the next module. It's also a best practice to walk around the room when speaking and to call on different people throughout the course to ask questions. It's also a good idea to introduce a little fun into the course, such as when a person answers a question or offers a productive opinion. I like to have a little container full of candy and toss them a candy bar or bag of M&Ms or something. Another idea is to have a jar full of slips of paper with the students' names written on them and randomly pull these and give the person a chance to answer a really tough question so they can earn extra points. At the end of the class, the person with the most points wins a gift card. The point is, there are a lot of creative things you can do to make the class fun. After all, this is not the most exciting subject matter, and you want to keep the trainees engaged, involved, and learning. Next, have a dedicated forklift and training area set aside away from coworkers, dangerous processes, hazards, excessive noise, and the like. Be sure the forklift is checked out, fueled, charged, and is safe to operate. Have an obstacle course already laid out and a clear idea as to what tasks the students must perform to pass. We've broken the hands-on module into 10 segments, and each segment can be worth, say, 10 points, with many companies requiring a 100 to pass or at least 90%, and then have the trainees go back and redo any sections they fail. Once again, be creative in planning out the hands-on course. Have it be challenging and real world. Use the student hands-on evaluation form provided and keep a copy on file. Exercise 1. Overview of the equipment. Ask each student trainee a question about certain aspects of the forklift's components and what their function is. Review if needed. Exercise 2. The daily inspection. Have each trainee identify at least 2 items they would check during an inspection, then have them actually check that item. For example, if they tell you tires and engine oil, have the trainee inspect the tires, report on their condition, and then open the hood and have them check the oil. Repeat this process until all the students have named all of the items on a daily check form. Give them an actual form to fill out. If the lift needs fluids like water in the battery or hydraulic fluid, this is a good time to show them how it's added. Exercise 3, startup and controls. Many new operators get very intimidated their first time on a forklift. So have each student safely enter the forklift, grade them on the 3-point entry method, start the engine, or on an electric lift, turn on the power switch, then review the gauges and their functions. While the engine is warming, this is a good time to have the trainee step through all the hydraulic controls. Raise, lower, tilt back, tilt forward, side shift, and have them do repetitive drills of this until they feel completely confident. Exercise 4, cones and steering. Rear steer is difficult for new operators. Have the student advance to a cone exercise by placing several cones, usually about 5 to 7 in total, in a straight line, about 6 to 7 feet apart. Also place a few cones out to the sides, or better yet, conduct this part of the training in an area that has a natural boundary on either side, like a wall and pallet rack. While winding their way through the cones, the operator should be constantly looking around to watch their rear tires and the forks. This should be tough, but not impossible. Dock them points for hitting a cone and for not keeping their forks at 4 to 6 inches off the ground. Again, this can be as elaborate as you want to make it. And to add an extra element, you might want to use tennis balls on top of the cones to see if they can avoid knocking them off, losing points if they do. And if you want to make it uber competitive for those very experienced drivers, you can add a time element. But remember, this is about safety, not speed. Exercise 5, aisles and stacking. A best practice I employ is having a student take a forklift with a pallet into an appropriate aisle, execute a 90-degree turn, safely lining up the forks on the appropriate placement zone, and have them raise the load to a particular beam and safely place the pallet in its zone. Here are some things to look for and grade them on. Executing the right angle turn, not too far right or left. Leveling the forks prior to raising. Putting the transmission in neutral. Looking around for coworkers. Not hooking the pallet after the placement takes place. Looking prior to backing out just far enough to clear the rack, and then lowering the forks prior to moving on. Exercise 6, load handling and traveling. Have the trainees each do a series of exercises whereby they negotiate through your facility. Grade the trainees on observing such rules as stopping at blind intersections and sounding their horns, stopping for pedestrians and crosswalks, going up and down a ramp with and without a load. Grade them on keeping forks at 4 to 6 inches, properly securing a load, and keeping the mast slightly tilted back. Finally, loading and unloading a semi-trailer may be a big part of an operator's job with a forklift. Have the students demonstrate they know how to properly prep a trailer for safe loading. Items like wheel chocks, a trailer locking device if one is present, proper dock board verification, and good lighting should all be part of the load handling section. Exercise 7, the data plate. Once the student has completed an obstacle course to your satisfaction, while they're some distance away from the rest of the group, ask the student 2 or 3 key questions about the data plate. An example might be asking, what's the maximum capacity at a 24-inch load center? What's the maximum fork height? And finally, the weight of the forklift. These are just examples. Go through the data tag and come up with a list of questions to ask. You can also pair this with having a load that is unique to your operation and then have the trainee determine if that particular load can be safely lifted with that forklift. Exercise 8, refueling and battery charging. A best practice I like to use when the students may not be looking is to turn off the LPG fuel valve, cutting the fuel supply to the engine. It'll stall out about 30 seconds later, and this represents a good time for the class to demonstrate the proper procedure for changing out an LPG tank. It also shows them that running out of fuel will almost always happen at an inconvenient time. If operating an electric lift, have the class demonstrate the procedure for charging a battery. Grade them on opening the hood, powering down the forklift, connecting the lift to the right type of charger using the right connector, and last, making sure they don't connect the charger to the forklift itself. You'll be amazed at how often that actually happens. Exercise 9, Specialty Equipment. If your organization runs a Class 7 rough terrain lift, order picker, pallet jack, or reach lifts, this section would apply to you. On rough terrain, test the students on things like knowing how to zero out on a grade, being able to read and comprehend boom and angle indicators. Grade them on items like operating in different modes of steering, 3 in all, knowing how to spot unsafe surfaces, and to drive in different gears. If operating an order picker, test the student on donning their fall restraint equipment and executing a proper order fill. Grade them on using the pallet lock clamp device and familiarize them with the load capacity chart and the steering wheel indicator. If training operators on the use of a reach truck, a key component of safe operation is plugging. A good technique I like to use is to set up 2 cones about 30 to 40 feet apart, have the student go back and forth between the cones several times, using only plugging, not the foot brake, to slow down, stop, and reverse direction. You can also use this same technique with pallet jacks and order pickers. Moreover, when training new operators on a reach lift, the use of a section of PVC pipe and a soccer ball are good tools to test the operator's ability to safely use the reach mechanism. Exercise 10, the facility, identifying key hazards. Walk the facility with the student trainees and have each one identify a hazard unique to your operation. I can tell you every facility has them. Items like gas lines or low-hanging pipes, ramps or grades, pedestrian hazards, a process that involves the moving of hazardous chemicals, large loads, specialized forklift attachments, and similar dangers.